Hi everybody, this is Solomon Schmidt from History Bites. I am very excited and honored to be here today with Mr. Tom Rice. He's 100 years old, and on June 6, 1944, he parachuted into Normandy, France as part of the D-Day operation during World War II. He also fought in the Battle of the Bulge and was wounded several times fighting in the service of the United States. Mr. Rice was also a history teacher for a number of decades after the war, and I'm very thankful. And Mr. Rice, thank you very much for coming on the History Bites YouTube channel.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Rice, when and where were you born?
I was born here in Coronado, August 15, 1921. It was thought I was born in that back house. I can't prove it, but I claim it.
But your parents can prove it.
Yeah, but they're both deceased.
Well,
So there's nothing there but a birth certificate. Coronado has had no cemetery, no dump pile, and a 4,000 population, and that was it. So, and then no hospital. So there's maybe some mystery about some of the notations on the birth certificate. But I claim I was born here in Coronado.
And what were some of the things you liked to do as a kid? Do you have any hobbies or sports you were a part of?
I was probably one of the richest kids in town because I trapped gophers, and I turned a gopher into the fire department and banged on the pole, and the fireman would slide down, and I'd give him a gopher, and he would give me a metal coin, and I'd take it to the city hall and get 25 cents. So there was a lot of gophers around Coronado, and especially this lot right in front of us is overloaded with gophers. So on the basis of that, I could take almost anyone I wanted to the Buck Rogers movie and any other activities that existed there. I was running track and field with the Coronado High School team, and I was running a half-mile and mile, and the kids knew I was capturing gophers and collecting money on the basis of it. So some of them started to raid my traps, and I started losing money. So when I did get a gopher, I'd follow the process, and the fireman would slide down, and I'd give it to him, and he would then throw it in the trash. Since I lost money, I went back in the trash can and picked up the gopher again and turned him in a second time. But I got caught, and because of the incident that took place was they cut one of the legs off the gopher. You can't collect 25 cents on a three-legged gopher.
And what would they have? What would they use the gophers for? What was so valuable about the gophers?
They were chewing up and eating everything. They were just a nuisance in the city.
Yeah.
As long as, and Coronado was inundated with rabbits, jackrabbits also. So while we were, 4 or 5 of us were in school, we owned a Model T Ford touring car, and we put one guy in the driver's seat, one on the left front fender, one on the right front fender, and one on the rear spare tire, and then go out on North Island and charge the sagebrush, and the jackrabbits would come out, and we'd follow one of them. Now, in each of the hands of the 2 guys on the fenders, they had polo mallets, and we would chase one rabbit, and they were big. Oh, they were so big that you just couldn't believe the size of those things, so we could easily see them and follow them, and we'd get close enough to them and then give them a polo mallet.
Sure.
Sure, yeah. And then they would end up there. But I think for the most of them, we feared that they had a disease called tularemia, so we didn't eat them though. But we got rid of them. They should have had a Pied Piper blowing his horns and leading them to Point Loma and walking into the ocean, get rid of them that way. but there was thousands of rabbits. The center of the railroad track ran from Hotel del Coronado to the landing, and they had bleachers facing North Island. And then toward North Island, behind all the rabbits, were the beaters. Guys with sticks would beat the bushes, and rabbits would come out, and they would be racing toward the people in the bleachers. And then in between the bleachers and the bushwhackers, they had sticks, and they were slaughtering the rabbits. So it was a mayhem for the most part, and it had a lot of publicity for the most part in around Coronado and San Diego. Rabbits, rabbits, rabbits. So the book that you picked up just a moment ago, it dealt with, no, not that one, a heavy book. It dealt
Jackrabbits to Jets.
Yeah, from Jackrabbits to Jets, the history of Coronado here. And Coronado is an aviation center for the inauguration of airmail, and that failed for the most part.
And so it sounds like Coronado was a crazy place to grow up with all those rabbits and gophers, and for a little kid.
When you leave Coronado, it's paradise lost.
Yeah.
When you return to Coronado, it's paradise regained. So once someone is here, they usually return, and the island is, for the most part, occupied by naval aviators.
And your father, Marcus, was in the Navy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how did he die?
He was killed in a naval air crash accident in the Panama Canal Zone in 1934. So my mother, my sister, and myself came to San Francisco and stayed there a year, and then came to Coronado, lived in the back house until 1938. My mother had the front house, this one, built. So it's almost 100 years old now. The back house is over 100 years old.
Yeah. So so he has two houses on his property, and they're kind of joined with like a pathway. The backyard of one house, there's a path from that to the front yard of the other house. And the house out, like the second house out back, is the one that's over 100 years old, and the one in front, the one we're actually in right now, is, like he said, just about 100 years old. And you lived during the 1930s. I mean, you were old enough to remember the Great Depression, and what was it like living during that time period?
Not much, very little of it.
Okay.
We were not a gang, we were a crowd here, all Navy oriented, and the competition was tremendous in every aspect of living. The parents were brilliant people, they were accomplished people, and the kids were expected to be likewise. So there was a lot of pressure of developing and working into some kind of activity that would be worthwhile in the city. So that's what we did. The only bad time we ever had here was Halloween night, where we ran up and down the alleys turning over trash cans.
You didn't find any gophers in
Other
those
thing
trash cans,
that
did
was
you?
interesting was there was a bridge from Coronado to North Island, and there was a body of water called the Spanish Bight that inundated the two land areas. There was only about a 50-yard strip of land that really separated them, and in a high tide and a storm condition, that so-called Spanish Bight would be washed out, and so tiger sharks and stingrays and everything was coming and going. So we did school once in a while, and went under the bridge with 5-pronged spearheads, and it was spearing stingrays and tiger sharks. And the hooky cop didn't like that because we were ditching school. So I made a sign called, and I marked it 50,000 votes, do not trespass. And he never bothered us from that point on.
So when did you start college? How old were you when you started college?
When I started college?
Yeah, what year? When did you start?
1940-41 I started college, San Diego State, and for the most part was clearing up my undergraduate work and doing a little bit of chemistry and physics. And then by 1942 I opted to join the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment direct. So I took about 8 guys to Georgia, and we landed there on Thanksgiving Day 1942. And we were expected to perform a certain number of acts. As a result of there was a 36-foot ladder. We would climb it one at a time, but only one was allowed in the aircraft nacelle or body of the old C-47. Opposite the door of the one we entered was a long 250-foot steel cable and a pulley attached to that. So we were required to stand in the door in a little bit of a crouch with hands opposite each other in the appropriate position on the outside of the door, while the instructor strapped a harness on us and gave us instructions. You count to 3,000 and you have a D-ring you pull from the reserve parachute, and you hand it to the, put it in the next hand. If you dropped it, you were gone. They sent you to W Company, and that was the end. The idea was, can you think while under extreme stress, because you fell about 22 feet, and you could see an inchworm crawling on the ground for the most part, doing a couple flips and whatnot. And we zoomed on down to a sawdust pit and waited for the rest of the guys. This jump at the beginning was one that really psychologically eliminates a lot of guys in a hurry.
Sure. Because
they came from all over the United States. They different physical conditions. Their language was unbelievably not understandable, and they had to work themselves into a position of, for the most part, strength, and this was the start of it, mental strength. And if they didn't pass that jump test, then they were gone to W Company.
What is W Company?
That was just an indication. That's the end of the alphabet.
Right.
So this is this canvas, for the most part, tent held quite a number of guys, and they were set out the next day to some straight leg outfit, such as an infantry unit.
And why did you want to become a paratrooper?
I was a risk taker. I took all kinds of risks. Since my father had been killed, I had no father. I had no dad, but I had a father. And so I got pounded on the butt end occasionally with a stick when I did something wrong, which I like to do. And I figured out on an instant in Norfolk, Virginia, where he was stationed, that he didn't like me too well because I didn't say goodbye to my brother, who died of double pneumonia and had a lung disease, and they had penicillin on the shelves, but they didn't know how to use it. So I was too young to, I could not force myself to go into a situation like that. So for the most part, I was on his black list. So he didn't pay too much attention to me. My mother didn't pay too much attention to. So without a dad and no father, I was out looking for one, and I found the track coach at Coronado High School, for the most part, as a surrogate father for me.
Okay.
And then from there on to San Diego State College, the Dean of Men, C.E. Peterson, became my mentor. And I was president of the Associated Men's Student Body my senior year at San Diego State College. And then put in a fifth year to get my teaching credential. Was hired by Chula Vista High School in the Sweetwater Union High School District. And it was designed to hold 692 people, but over 1,000 appeared the first day. So they had to build another high school, and that one was called Bonita High, and then another one on after that was Mar Vista. So the school district expanded rather rapidly. And I put in 44 years at Chula Vista High and Hilltop, and teaching some U.S. history at Southwestern College.
Mm-hmm. And you taught to 11th and 12th graders, you said?
Yeah, I taught 11th and 12th graders, AP classes.
Okay.
And I required a full footnoted term paper 4 times a year. I had the same kids for 180 days. And that was the best thing that could ever happen to a teacher, because you really have got to know them, and you could help them along for the most part. And they were an age where they absorbed almost everything. So I was lecturing quite a few periods during the day. So some funny things happened in class. There was a girl in class that was talking across the aisle to her 2 friends, and it was interrupting my lecture. Mm-hmm. And I asked her to be quiet, and on the 3rd time I was a little bit annoyed. And I told her, for the most part, I'll use the name Janice. Janice, you're a disturbing element. So she went home and told her mother that I called her some names, and her mother came storming up the next day to talk to me and knocked on the door, and I had to deal with her out on the sidewalk. I asked her, well, what did your daughter tell you that
you called her?
What you were called? Yeah. And she said, I called her a dirty elephant instead of a
disturbing element.
Yeah. So they said I for the most part was always alerted to the fact that there's some kids in class that are very creative, and she was one of them.
And is disturbing element a term you used in the military? That sounds like a military term.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
No.
And you said in your book, Mr. Rice has a book called Trial by Combat. This is sort of his memory of his early life in Coronado, but then his memories of serving, training for the Army, and then actually parachuting into Normandy. It's a great book, and there's a link for it where you can buy it underneath this video. But in this book, Mr. Rice, you said that the Army told paratroopers that when you jump out of an airplane, you look out, you don't look down. Did you have a fear of heights? Did you ever have a fear of heights?
No.
Okay.
No, heights never bothered me at all. It's kind of fun to take a risk with a group. It's a little more difficult to take a risk just by yourself, because you can conjure up all kinds of results that,
right,
for the most part, may not ever exist.
Right. When you have your buddies around you, you feel a little bit less nervous, right? And were you excited or scared to go to fight in Europe? Can you remember what your attitude was like when you actually went over there?
Where, in Normandy or in Fort Benning where we trained?
I guess both. Did you enjoy the training?
Oh, I loved the training because I was in condition. These guys came from all over the United States, from straight-leg infantry outfits and all physical kinds of conditions, mm-hmm, different dialect, and they were all trying to outmuscle one another for the most part, so there was a lot of interaction among and between. So, get me back to your original question.
Yeah, no. Were you excited or scared to go to fight in Europe?
Routinely, we were focused, totally focused on what we had to do, how to do it, when we will do it, and where we will do it. So we were with a group of individuals that had been trained trained and trained so well, so thoroughly, that there was no question about it. We were, for the most part, methodical. Let me tell you about the training. All of our officers from battalion up to general were West Point graduates. They were a great bunch of guys, and they put chaos in front of us every day, or every other day, or whenever they felt that we needed to be chaos.
Right.
And the chaos was absolutely total, such as we were doing a 25-mile march with water discipline, and some parts of it we're going to run, and we're going to carry all of our equipment also. No one drops out. If someone is failing and is going to drop out, we take his backpack and we carry it, and we carry him as far as we can.
Right.
But no one will drop out. Under the guise of a kind of a obstacle course, we had to crawl through pig intestines and pig heads and all kinds of sorted pieces of pig meat, and we got ourselves dirty and stinking.
To simulate like a battlefield?
To simulate the worst
Right.
that could possibly happen. So those things existed, and on and on. We jumped off of a dam and into the water, and I had to play lifeguard for the most part. And I was a good swimmer in the minute while I was in high school, because of the ocean part and the bay part here.
Right.
So let's see, did I cover?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so you, before you went to fight in Europe, you went to England, right, or Scotland. You sailed to Scotland, wasn't it very late,
no,
1943?
I took about 8 or 9 guys from the recruiting center here in San Diego to San Pedro. There they gave us at 2 o'clock in the morning a dinner and an IQ test. And I was well aware that the Army was looking for machine gunners, and that's real risky. That's a high priority to enemy target, and people who are trained in communications, another high priority target. So after we got to a little community CCC camp, Civilian Conservation Corps, known as Camp Toccoa, 13 miles down the road from Camp Toccoa, the top of the mountain was carved off, and our camp was situated there. It was supposed to be secreted, and nobody was supposed to be talking about it. And we had 13 weeks of training there. No one could leave at all. And after the 13 weeks, then we marched on toward Fort Benning, Georgia, did our training there in A, B, C, and D phases. A phase was physical education, and we were in such good physical condition that we used to play tricks on the instructors at Fort Benning. We would do something wrong in doing a push-up or whatnot, and they would come over and growl at us, and you've got 25 more push-ups to do. Oh yes, Sergeant, which arm? And that would bring them to a boiling point.
Sure.
So we had them going for the most part. They wore T-shirts half the size of their body build, and their muscles stuck out all over as a kind of a warning to us that we're tough guys.
Right. But you weren't scared by them, were you?
No, no. It's fun to do a lot of things together because you got support. In other words, if you're on the front line and it's dark and you hear footsteps crushing on broken limbs and dried up leaves, you love to hear the firing of your neighbor who is in a foxhole maybe 10 yards from you, that you know he's there. That gives you confidence.
Right.
But if you're there by yourself, that's another story. And you want to know the guy on your other side of you, the left side, he has a mortar and he's firing, and when you hear the thump of the mortar hit the firing pin at the bottom and the flash of the blue light coming out, that gives you bravery. So confidence and bravery. So now back to the chaos that was thrown at us.
In training. In paratrooper
We had to
training.
reduce the chaos to a danger, and then reduce the danger to an inconvenience, then reduce the inconvenience to something you can walk away from and get on with the business at hand. So those things that we did to reduce the danger and the chaos and the inconvenience, we logged those processes in the back part of our minds for the most part, and we could call upon them when needed. So it became a developmental situation of maintaining a high level of courage and bravery.
And mental stamina,
Yes,
right?
right.
Just keeping yourself ready so
That's
that
right.
when a stressful situation was put in front of you, you wouldn't freak out.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go crazy.
Yeah.
So when did you sail to Europe? When did you actually go over to Europe? Because you went to the UK first, right?
After Camp Toccoa, Georgian artillery training, we went to Fort Benning and did the jump school. We came back, got a furlough of 7 days here, and I came back to Coronado, which was a dead city for the most part.
Right.
And everything was in movement. Hotel Dill was the Officers Club and Recreation Center. And we moved from Coronado. I moved out of Coronado and went back to camp early, and for the most part was trained in demolition and for the poisonous gases. I was a chemical warfare agent and a recipient of some mustard gas on the inside of my right and left arm, and then put anti-gas ointment on one arm, and then watched the development of a big blister, plus for the most part, the dissolving of the gas on the other arm. And things started to happen then after Fort Benning. We went to the Tennessee maneuvers. Now I have to back up a little bit because the 101st Airborne Division was a side product or a developmental product out of Wisconsin 6th Infantry Division. And the 6th became the 101st Airborne Division. Now, as I understood it, the Germans had been experimenting with airborne activities as well as the Japanese, but mostly the Germans. And they had 3,000 soldiers in their regiments. In the 101st Airborne Division and the 82nd Airborne Division, there was 2,000 infantry soldiers in the regiment. So we're undermanned for the most part when we face an enemy. So the 501 came into being, so that we had 2,000 additional individuals in the 101st, and that evened the playing ground on the football field, as it were, when the Germans met us and we met them. And every time we went into combat, we were working against the German 6th and the German 1st Parachute Infantry Regiment. And they were attached to the Air Force.
The Luftwaffe.
And we, the American airborne units, were attached to the infantry. So there's some difference in technique, weapons, and methodology of how we did things.
Sure. And the German 6th Paratroop Regiment wasn't. I read that was a very elite regiment.
Yeah, they were elite. They took an oath of pledge to Adolf Hitler, etc., etc. And maybe you remember the name Max Schmeling. He was a boxer and came to the United States to see how much money he could earn. And when he left, he was put into the German parachute units. And he went into Sicily to jump, and in the door he stood and he refused to jump, so they threw him out. Now, prior to that, he was Hitler's favorite individual because he was over 6 feet tall and blonde and blue-eyed, so he was the the
Perfect. Right.
model and icon of German youth.
Right.
When Hitler found out that he refused to jump and had to be thrown out, he demoted him to lowest status possible.
Right. Yeah. Didn't kill him because he wanted him for
Yeah.
the war effort, probably. And so let's see. So you went to training. You had a furlough in Coronado.
Yeah.
And when? So what's the time now? What part of 1943?
We're in probably the middle of spring.
Of 1943?
Yeah, 43 and back. And then I met the regiment at Fort Benning, and from there we went to Camp Mackle, and we did the Tennessee maneuvers with a number of other regiments to fine-tune all of our activities.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were much larger now. We were equal to what was the German division and regiments, and for the most part we were then attached to the 101st Airborne Division, with the 506, the 502, and the 501 were all infantry regiments. Of course, there were other regiments in the 101st. Hospital unit, a military police unit, just and a clerical unit of typists, etc., etc. And whatever the Army wanted in their table of organization, we got.
And why was the 101st Airborne Division? They had a nickname, right? I think it's on your patch, the Screaming Eagles.
Yeah.
And was that just a reference to the American Eagle, of course?
Our motto was, or our symbol, our icon, all wrapped it together here, was a Screaming Eagle. And his name was Abe. And how much truth there was in it, I don't know, but we knew who Abe was. And he wasn't kept in good health too often, so he died while we were in Fort Benning, I believe. And then we adopted a cub bear, and the cub bear, we just overlapped a period of time before we went to Boston to ship overseas at Camp Miles Standish. So we turned him loose and he hid out underneath one of the barracks for, I believe, the 463rd aircraft unit that came in. I don't know what they did with the bear, but we had to get rid of him. Prior to the bear, we had a goat, and we loved to feed the goat beer and watch him do all his antics on 2 feet on the same side of the body. He needed some jump training, so 3 or 4 jump masters took him up to jump heights and with Colonel Johnson, and they tried to get him out the door. He even had a harness made for him, and he refused to go, so they brought him back down, and they had a ceremony of dishonorable discharge from the unit, and got rid of the goat, and we got the bear then.
So you were called the Screaming Eagles, not the Screaming Goats. Yeah. That's probably...
What the 82nd would ask us what we're screaming for. We had all kinds of descriptive answers, and we countered their complaints about what we did and how we did it. We called them AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, because their motto was that there were individuals in the 82nd Airborne from every state of the Union. So all American, but we converted that to Alcoholics Anonymous. And once that was announced and any one of us were in the vicinity, the fight started.
There were a lot of fights then, like in between you guys in training. I read there was a big fight in Charlotte.
Charlotte, North Carolina was a battle that for the most weak 501 created an environment in one of the beer halls where I think a fellow by the name of Calamatas ordered a beer, and he walked back toward his table, and some guy from the either the 442nd Nisi Japanese group or an Air Force guy stuck his foot out and tripped him, and he and the beer hit the floor, and he just nonchalantly got up, picked up his glass, and went back and ordered another beer and made it to his table, and got underneath their table, and then he worked his way up to his knees and then stood up and spilled all the beer all over him and the table upside down and yelled Geronimo, and the fight started from there. And they put machine guns without ammunition on the street corners around the cafe, and it spread out throughout the city for a period of time. So Calamantes and a half a dozen other guys, they had a pass for 3 days, and they wanted to go to Washington, D.C., so they did, but the train did not stop at Charlotte, North Carolina. So Calamantes, for the most part, broke into the train station and got a hold of the conductor and got his lantern and stopped the train. And they got on board and went to Washington, D.C., and spent 3 days there. And on the way back, they were stopped at the camp where the regiment was located and held for Colonel Johnson. And he came down and he had to vouchsafe that they were in his regiment. And he called the regiment to a grand inspection tour and said, if there's any more of this foolhardy stuff and you guys don't act like Geronimos, you're going to lose your jump boots. So we straightened up for the most part, and that was the end of that story.
And Colonel Johnson was the leader of the 501st
Yeah, Colonel
Regiment?
Johnson was the commanding officer of the 501 Parachute Infantry. As I understand it, he graduated from West Point, or rather Naval Academy.
Naval Academy, yeah.
He didn't like that too much, so he opted for the Army, and I think he was in one or two of the southern states, in Fort Bliss or somewhere around the deep south, and the call came for those who wanted to be involved in airborne activities to show up. And so he did, and he was ranked in as a colonel, and he directed most of our activity. He was loaded with energy for the most part. I did not know him too well. I wasn't supposed to know him, but I carried him on my back in a relay race of about 200 yards. And he weighed 157, and that was a real chore. I don't think I'd have made it. And at that turnaround point, he told me to get off, and I would get on his back. I weighed 137, and he breezed through that, and then went over to our company commander, Captain Phillips, and smiled at him, and Colonel Johnson bounded off like a turkey vulture and went to another regiment to find out what kind of physical condition they were in. So he was out working in the field, hands-on, knowing exactly what we were doing, how we were doing it, and our physical conditions.
And you looked up to him? You looked up to him then? Did you guys admire him? Because I know there were some regiments where there was conflict between the officers and the enlisted men.
We didn't have too much conflict with the others because we were in different cities and different locations in England. But we respected our activities for the most part if they wore the right patch and acted properly, and they had the jump boots on. So we had quite a bit of disdain and difficulty with the straight leg guys because they would try to gang up on us. They didn't like us because we had boots and we were dressed differently, had Eisenhower jackets, and we looked quite a bit different. So they would gang up on us and try to beat the dickens out of us. And the cry for Geronimo went out, and the riot started again.
And you said you went to Colonel Miles Standish Base in Boston. Is that where you sailed from Boston to the United Kingdom?
After the maneuvers, and we were certified as good enough. We did things well enough and appropriately enough under the right conditions. We entrained to Camp Miles Standish. It was a Boston debarkation point to England, And they were pushing about 1,000 to 2,000 men through that camp every day into overseas duties. So the sanitation was absolutely nil. I got the mumps on both sides, and we boarded the USS William G. Goethals, steel reinforced old concrete ship. The maximum speed was about 10 knots. And that the mumps is kind of painful, so they put me in isolation for the trip of 10 days across. And when we landed in Glasgow, Scotland, I took about 8 guys to the nearest medical institution established by the Army in Scotland. That's the only part of Scotland I ever saw, except when I had a furlough much later.
Yeah, and you visited Edinburgh, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So you were in England then for about 5 months
Well, we landed
before D-Day?
in England about January 1. I went to the hospital. The rest of the guys went to a community called Lambourne. It was south and east, evidently, of London. And you could ride the LMS, London Midland Scottish Railroad, as long as you had your uniform on. Mm. And so we did that. So after the period of quarantine in the hospital, we went to Lambourne, and the company had a furlough, and 2 or 3 of us we remained in camp and supervised things that were going on until the company got back. When they got back, then us supervisors, we got a furlough, and we went to Scotland. That's the only time I ever saw Scotland in the USO. But we hired a taxi cab and a driver, and we toured the area of Scotland, and we enjoyed that for the most part. We walked the Miracle Mile several times. The 501 Parachute Infantry Regiment had an objective of capturing and maintaining a tight hold on 4 causeways, causeway A, B, C, and D, that ran from some of the communities in the interior of France, such as Saint Marie de Mont, Saint Combe de Mont, and I can't recall some of the others, Carentan and Saint-Mary-Glisse. Mm. Saint-Mary-Glisse had 5 major highways that entered that city. So the Germans, for the most part, were very strong in their objective was to capture Carentan and Saint-Mary-Glisse. So we were dropped right in that area, in the wrong place at the wrong time, under the poor conditions. Now, don't let me get diverted into another area of activity. Let's try to bring me back to your question.
No, that's okay. We're just about there. So D-Day was June 6th.
Yeah.
Did you and the soldiers in your regiment know about what you were going to Europe to do, or
No.
was it secretive?
I was sent on special assignment to Lieutenant Colonel, the executive officer, under Colonel Johnson. I had to know where he was, what he was doing, why he was doing it, and how to get in contact with him immediately.
Okay. From
June 1 to June 5. And early afternoon, June 5, I returned to the regiment. We practiced rolling our bundles, putting our heavy equipment in a double-ended, double-barreled, double-flashlighted bundle, and rolled it up and slung it underneath the aircraft. There were 6 of those, each weighed 300 pounds, and 1 in the door. So that made a total of 7, and that's over 1,800 pounds that we had to deal with.
And when did your plane take off to go to D-Day? Was that late, the night of June 5th?
At Maryfield Airport. It was part of the 506 that had a similar objective, but in a little different direction. And I think it was the 1st and 2nd platoon, but the entire regiment of the 501 was at Maryfield. And we practiced loading our bundles like I'd mentioned before, and then we got soot and from the engine exhaust and rubbed that on our face with, and we had mohawk haircuts. Our officers objected to that, but we just smiled at them and say, "Tough luck, Lieutenant.
Yeah.
If you wanted us to repair it, then gather up the hair and glue it back on."
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we went in looking like for the most part, Iroquois Indians.
Right.
And that was part of the technique, a psychological approach to combat. Now I've lost your question again.
No, I guess my next one was what was going through your mind before you jumped on D-Day, before you jumped out of the airplane? Were you just focused on your mission, or again were you nervous?
We didn't know what the exact mission was. I did not know because I had been with the lieutenant colonel and was not ever oriented in that direction. So I jumped number one in the aircraft. There were the number of C-47s is up for grabs and up for debate, I guess. But the number I had, there was 982 C-47s, was going to drop the 82nd and 101st Airborne Division in Upper and Lower Normandy, in the area from Coronado, which was about 100 meters above Saint-Mary Glace, and some of the various other cities that I've mentioned before, St. Conde Mountain, etc., and hold that land so the 1st Infantry Division and the 24th Infantry Division could move through us. We would hold and take and supervise those 4 causeways. That was our major objective. The 82nd Airborne had an objective to stop all tanks and cut the peninsula into 2 parts, and any tanks coming through to destroy them, because if the tanks once got in, that was mobile artillery, and we could have been pretty well scattered and beaten up at that time, because the tanks are followed by infantry.
Right. So when you jumped out of the airplane and you landed on the ground, it was dark, right? It was dark around you on D-Day.
Go. Some things happened before that. We took off at 8:41 English double summertime, and we loaded. I was the last one to get in the plane because I'm jumping number 1. Number 2 and number 3 men, Frank Ficaroda and Tony Goss, they had switches that would relay an electrical current to an instrument that held the bundles underneath the aircraft. And in case the pilot was injured or something happened up there in the cockpit that he was not capable of performing that drop, they were the secondary safety men on the drop. There were 18 jumpers in the aircraft, and I knew every one of them. I'm jumping number 1. I weighed 287 pounds. My normal weight was 137. I had all kinds of military bric-a-brac that the Army gave me, and we were still orienting toward its protective use. There's supposed to be secret stuff such as the shape charge and the bazooka, and some of the rifle ammunition. The riflemen carried the Garand M1A1 gas operated. I carried the Thompson submachine gun. So we took off at 8:41 English double summertime in section 16 with 45 C-47s. It took 9 C-47s to carry in a company of 128 men. So we dropped, after we assembled at 5,000 feet, section 16 moved south and east toward Portsmouth Bill. That was the code name for Portsmouth, England. We dropped down to 1,500 feet to get under German radar, and an American midget submarine was in the English Channel, gave us a go-ahead signal, and we flew up the Gulf of Aqaba, which separated the Cottonton Peninsula from the Brittany Peninsula. We could have turned right or left. The Germans never knew that, but we turned left. And we entered the Cottonton Peninsula on the eastern side, and I'm looking out the door and I can see it's low tide. The jump altitude was 750 feet, and we were to drop on drop zone B. We never made it to drop zone B. The Pathfinders never made it to drop zone A, B, C, or D. They were, for the most part, scattered. My company commander, Robert Phillips, was dropped 20 miles from where I dropped in. I landed on a pasture that was dry. My number 18 man, Marvin Van Buskirk, who was a good, strong pugilist and a swimmer, he ended up in the English Channel, and he had to get out of that parachute and all of that equipment as best he could. But he did so and hid out in the hedgerow until, for the most part, he dried. And the second thing, he heard ammunition going off and a firefight starting, so he got dressed and got into the foray as quickly as he could. So when I jumped out, I could see that we were heading right toward a rectangle of anti-aircraft fire and machine gun. We did not have self-sealing gas tanks, and that concerned me. But just as a flash, because things were moving so quick, it was just micro movement. Right. And I was in the door as the pilot swung off to the right and broke up section 16 and headed towards section D. So we had already stood up, hooked up, and checked equipment. And Lieutenant Jansen was the jump master, and he moved from number 18 man after he checked Van Buskirk. He moved up to number 1 where I was, and 18 would say, okay, 18 is okay. He would check 17, and 17 was past the word 17 okay, and on up to number 1. And when the word got to me, I would say, I'm okay, let's go. And there's 2 lights above the door, one a white and a red and a green one. While you're in flight, the white one is on. When it's jump time, you have 8 minutes, the red one goes on, the white one goes out. And so we did all the hookups and all the activities that were necessary that we'd practiced for so many different times. And we stood there wobbling and swishing and back and forth, and no one got sick because we had some kind of a medication that kept us from getting seasick. We had a good dinner before that time, and when the plane moved out of section 16, it turned a 360-degree, almost a complete circle, and then came back to 180 degrees, so we were heading toward drop zone D. And when I went out the door, when the plane was bouncing and swishing and yawing and pitching, my force of the release of the 6 bundles underneath the aircraft by Ficaroda and Tony Doss was premature. The plane went up about 50 feet, and the bundle in the door, for the most part, we got pushed out and okay. So I followed that bundle out a little bit late, and as I entered the atmosphere, my left armpit got caught in the lower left-hand corner of the door as he squeezed down tight on my left side. I swung out, came back and hit the side of the aircraft, and the rest of the guys were going underneath me. My helmet came off, the musette bag came up in my face, and the reserve parachute was holding it in that position. So I couldn't see what was going on, but I swung out again and able to straighten my arm, and I got free, and I made 2 oscillations, and I was on the ground. I think I jumped at about 500 feet. And so I had such heavy, bulky equipment that I didn't get hurt. Made a parachute landing fall over my right arm and tried to get the reserve and the musette bag out of the way. Couldn't do it because they were all tucked in so tight from the opening of the parachute. So I went to my zipper under my chin where my cricket was and the switchblade knife and pulled the blade out and started sawing my way through the harness, and the cricket dropped out and I lost it. So I got loose from that, and Dodson Ficcarota showed up with a mortar on their shoulders, and the three of us, we crossed a small English, French canal and stood on the road trying to figure out where in the dickens we were, and we heard a click. Waited 10 seconds, we heard another click. 10 more seconds, we clicked back. We heard 2 clicks, then 3 clicks, then 4 clicks. And by the time we hit the 5th click, the guys that were doing the clicking were within 5 or 10 feet of us. So they announced their presence. I could recognize their physical structure because because of the way they talked, their elocution and language bent them in the direction of the 501. The first 10 men were supposed to walk in the direction of the flight of the aircraft. The number 11 through 18 were to walk in the opposite direction and meet at a point X. Who knows where that is?
Sure.
Who knows where the canals are?
Right.
Except when you try to get through them. So that technique, for the most part, failed.
And what was you said click, and did that anything, you mentioned something called a cricket.
You know about the crickets?
No, what is that?
Oh, okay, it was a enlarged cricket. There's no crickets in France. And it was made by the Boston Shoe Company. And they were requested by the Army and given to the 501. I don't think the 82nd had them. They had some other method. So we'd click, stop and listen. We heard another click, we'd click twice. And so we'd move toward each other on the basis of clicks.
Yep, okay.
And then going back to where I left you off there, the statement that here we are standing in front of 5 or 6 more guys with clicks going. And we had ended up with 5 clicks, then the password. The password was flash, thunder, welcome. So I would say flash. If it was, hopefully if it was an American, he would say thunder. That would prove to me that for the most part, it was an American who said flash, or rather thunder. And then I would come back with welcome. And that would prove to him that I am an American. The Germans never caught on to that. And then the crickets, for the most part, were useless after that. We used passwords based on regimental activities from that point on. So I took so many patrols out, it's unbelievable. And one of the patrols was, the code word was, the password was water built. And the Germans pronounced a W like a V.
V.
So it was a quick giveaway for the most part.
Right.
So the patrols that I took out were for reconnaissance. Don't set up a battle. That's not going to be possible because you only have 2 or 3 other guys with you. So there we are, and standing in front of these guys with a code passed between us, hugging and recognizing them. And one of them said to me, "I have a hand grenade with the pin pulled." Well, you can't put a pin back in a hand grenade after it's been pulled. So I said, "Give me the hand grenade." I got everybody down and I rolled over to the side of the road and dropped it in a little canal and rolled back. By the time I got to the center of the roadway, this thing exploded after 5 seconds in water and shrapnel. It was an anti-personnel hand grenade. It looked like a small pineapple, you know. And then we broke up into groups of 3 and went on down the road looking for Germans. And we had more hand grenades than Germans.
And you had, can you describe what you mean when you said in the book, you said we were playing cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians on D-Day.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
You hit them and destroy them. You hit them and capture them. but you hesitate to capture them. So what are you going to do when you capture them? We're behind lines 3 to 5 kilometers.
Well,
We captured 400 Germans. What are we going to do? 50 paratroopers capturing 400 Germans.
Right.
What dickens are we going to do with those guys? We stripped them of their armament, and the glider pilots came in early morning, and they didn't know what to do. They were supposed to meet at a particular point. Impossible again. So some of them joined us with a rifle, and others took guarding the German prisoners. So we played, we found the Germans, we pounced on them. They didn't know exactly who we were, and they thought probably we were FFI, Free French of the Interior, or resistance fighters. And we captured them. My third officer in the platoon was Lieutenant Briere, and he had volunteered to organize a platoon to protect General Taylor. And General Taylor only had 4 jumps, and the 5th jump was his combat jump. So when they got on the ground, that was the platoon, for the most part, went into action, set up a perimeter defense so he would not get hurt or anything else happen to him. And after his giving instructions by Lieutenant Briere was given instructions by General Taylor to take a small squad and move as quickly as you possibly can to intercept Captain Mabry of the 24th Infantry Division, Company A. And please note the time, the exact time that the airborne forces meet the straight-legged infantry. And that was 11:04 a.m. And any other time that's ever mentioned by any other historian or writer is not correct unless he announces 11:04 a.m.
On D-Day?
On D-Day,
On D-Day.
yeah.
Okay. So when you met up with those 5 or 6 Americans, what did you said you were looking for Germans, but what happened on D-Day? Like what did you actually, because that was, you jumped very early in the morning.
Yeah.
So what happened on that day?
I jumped at about 1:41. It's still dark. And I knew I put my knees together, dropped my ankles together, and made a 1-point landing. And you know about the circumstances that occurred there. I rolled and bounced a little bit. And when I did get out, I threw away a lot of the military equipment, the life preserver. I threw that away, or I buried it. The second thing, I got rid of the gas mask, punched the eyeballs, glass plates out, so that a couple of guys wouldn't fight over it, and then buried it. If there's any K rations, we were horribly hungry, because tension really just tears you apart if you haven't any food. Right. So we had to bury our food byproducts, the containers and whatnot, so that the Germans wouldn't feel that the Americans had gone through this area. So down the road we went, broke into about 5 or 6 guys, and I saw a house about 100 yards down the road and about 50 yards off. I figured, well, we haven't run any Germans yet. We got more hand grenades than Germans. I better kind of scout this house out. So I took Floyd Martin and went to the front door, and I told Floyd, don't bang on it like an ugly American, just knock on it. And he used his rifle butt and he banged on that thing. You could hear it from Carenton to San Mary Glace, and sent the rest of the guys around to the rear of the house in case there were Germans in there. And on that basis, about 30 seconds later, a Frenchman came out, and he was dressed in a long white nightgown from shoulder to floor. He had a nightcap on with a tassel on the end of it, and a blob of white cotton attached to the end of the tassel. He had a dish in his hand with a lighted candle. What does that remind you of immediately?
Ebenezer Scrooge.
Absolutely. Christmas Carol by Scrooge. And I started to laugh, and Floyd Martin brought me up to danger senses and told me that better be careful. You're still in danger, and you're laughing at a thing that you were familiar with a long time ago. So get yourself organized. So then we went on and we looked for our bundles. And in the meantime, in finding bundles in trees and water and wherever else we could, detach the parachute from them. When the bundles hit the ground, there was a double flashlight on them. Red was a machine gun. And when they did hit the ground with a heavy blow, the light would flash on and blink. So you could see the flashing and you could determine the color. And we had memorized the combination of colors within reason. So green and blue and yellow and red, all kinds of combinations gave us the clue as to what was in that package of that bundle. So we unrolled them and took them apart, couldn't bury the carpets for them. And we started looking for our friends, and we found about 30 or 40 of them gathered in about the area under Major Allen. And we stood at platoon attention and dropped whatever equipment that we didn't need. You're going into battle, he told us, and you keep your ammunition and your weapons and a few sea rations. And so we did. And we went in between San Miguel and Carenton, and we came into contact with the 6th German Parachute Regiment.
The elite unit.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
They were having a party on June 5. One battalion was in Perrier, another battalion, I don't know the name of the city, but it was some distance away. A third battalion was moving toward Utah Beach.
Right.
And we met them as they turned around and came back. They didn't find out what they wanted to find out. And they were coming back and were supposed to meet, I think, at Carenton. Mm-hmm. But Carenton is about 100 meters higher than San Miguel, and the Douvre River and its two tributaries run parallel and empty into the North Sea or the English Channel. Yep. And the Douvre River is not wadable. It had locks, and the locks were open, and the polders or the fields were flooded. And in the fields, if they weren't flooded, and they didn't have time to flood them, because it took about 8 hours for that water to move from one point to another, they planted trees with the bark and limbs stripped off, and attached wire from one to another. We called them Rommel's asparagus. And they were all over the place. So if a parachute hit one of those things, he'd for the most part be main coming down at 22 miles an hour. And it was basically an anti-glider deterrent.
And Rommel, you mean the German general,
Yeah.
Erwin Rommel,
Yeah.
who devised all those plans to keep you out or hurt you when you landed.
Yeah, right. Or you'd get your throat cut.
Sure.
Whatever it would be, you'd be hung up.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you said in your book that around 40%, 38% I think it was, of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment were killed or wounded during the D-Day invasion. So
never returned, killed,
right.
wounded, captured, or whatever it may
Missing
be,
in
or
action.
hiding out. It took about a week for us to really get together. And when we did, then we were a pretty good force of maybe 80 or 90 fellows. So the regiment had 38% casualty on D-Day. So 37 days of fighting. Now, when we landed in England on January 1 and went to Lambourne, we had 3 practice jumps. Beaver, Eagle, and forgot the name of the other one at the moment.
It's in your book. I can't quite remember it. So 3
and
jumps
Tiger.
in England.
Beaver,
Tiger.
Eagle, and Tiger. 2 of them were day jumps. Eagle was a night jump. And on the night jump, I sprained my ankle in a furrow. And I knew how to tape ankles because I had a medic with me, and I had taped my kids in the cross-country runs on many occasions.
Yep.
So I had to a shoelace on my toe and pulled it back, and we taped that up. And so I went into combat with a taped ankle for 37 days. I did not tell anyone I had a sprained ankle because they would have removed me from the parachute manifest, and I would have been out of luck. But it was well healed by the time the 37th day came about and we returned to England. And after we returned to England, the scenario changes a little bit in that we were still reviewing our training techniques, and we had 18 jumps put before us on paper, some in Belgium, some in southern France, some in other places that I don't remember, that we went to Maryfield Airport and we got everything ready for a jump except ammunition. And I knew that when we did not get ammunition, it was no go.
Right.
So the 18th one, on September 17th, we got ammunition, and that was the birth of Market Garden. We jumped in Holland at the lower part.
Operation Market Garden.
Operation Market Garden, yeah.
So you were trying to free Holland from the Nazis?
Yeah, the same thing.
Okay.
And we jumped, there was 20,000 of us jumped there, which was a little larger invasion than the one in Normandy. The largest invasion that ever occurred was the 17th Airborne jumped at Remagen Bridge, and I think there was around 27,000 there. I'm not sure of that figure. All these become unknown entities. Nobody has a real exact count of them, but you can come within a few hundred of them.
Yeah. So can you tell us about your experiences during Operation Market Garden? You know, especially there was the time you spared the life of a German soldier.
That was a German soldier?
What time you spared the life of a German soldier during Market Garden, I think it was. Wasn't that in Holland?
Yeah.
When you did that? We
jumped. We boarded again the same procedure that we used in Overlord. We used in Market Garden, but the flight was a little over an hour, and it was drop zone A. It was to the flatland area of Wegel on Hell's Highway, which was about 65 miles long. We were to jump, for the most part, not too far in, but 10 or 15 miles. And we're to secure that entire highway from its beginning to its ending, which was Arnhem in Germany. And the British were scheduled, for the most part, the first to jump, but they had a very finite knowledge of what the activities were and what the land looked like there. But at the last minute, the 82nd and 101st were given the assignment of jumping into that area. And then it was reversed again, and the British took over that area because they finally decided they knew more about the land than we did. Sure. So it was a causeway of 65 miles that was above the wetted and marshy lands, which is not tank territory. And it was, for the most part, a one-way highway taken over by the British. And at a particular signal given by a high commanding officer near the border, Market Garden was launched. And we jumped at drop zone A. We missed drop zone A. The lieutenant colonel wasn't observing correctly. We missed that, and tangent to A was A1. Its long axis was hooked onto A, so we jumped at A1, which put us probably about 10 kilometers out of Wegel. There were so many aircraft in the air. The jump altitude was 12,000 or 1,250 feet, and to be on the ground as quickly as possible, and aircraft below me, and I got caught in a thermal of one of those aircraft or a group of aircraft, and when the bundles were unloaded, I went up about 50 feet. And when I jumped out, I was well above some of the surrounding aircraft, and I just didn't know what to do but to sweat it out. I tried to climb the risers, and that didn't do any good because I was still going up. So I just rode it out for fun because they weren't shooting at me, as I can tell. And when I got about 500 feet, I saw of a good place to land, which would have been in the roof of a thatched house and then come down in the kitchen. But I chose not to do that, and finally maneuvered the parachute over to a cabbage patch surrounded by a steel picket fence. And I just missed that. Boy,
Yeah, you're
I
lucky.
was lucky there. Just missed it, and made a standing knee landing, and my muzzle of my submachine gun went into the ground, and I couldn't use it for the most part. And I landed opposite the Heathwick Castle. Now, there was a roadway running from St. Odin Road, where there was a German training camp for paratroopers there, and parallel to that roadway was the river AA. The Germans were alerted and saw all of the aircraft coming in, and all of the white parachutes in the air. One German officer in his foxhole, he noted on September 17th that it never snowed in September, but he thought there were so many parachutes coming down, they were white and it was snowing. So I got his memoirs and a copy of his
On his autobiography?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
so we landed there, and I gathered myself together and got out of the harness without any difficulty this time. And guys came up with the border. We were surrounded for the most part with Americans, and we were supposed to jog and run into Bagel in the form of Company A, B, and C. What stupidity.
A, B, and C.
We were all messed up, we were surrounded, we were going in different directions.
Sure.
And some of the guys landed on the castle property.
Right, so there was no forming up, you mean? You
Yeah.
couldn't find each other?
One guy, Harry Ward, his parachute, skirt of his parachute got hooked up on a drawbridge on the castle. And Harry was hanging over a dried up moat. He was captured, and we didn't see him for quite a period of time. We ran and we walked and we ran to
Vagel?
Vagel, yeah. And the whole town was out. Everybody evidently who lived in the town was in that city square. And a woman came up to me and asked me quietly, "How many Americans are here?" I said 50,000, when there was only three, you know.
Yeah, to make her feel
I
good.
knew at that point she was probably a spy, because the spies were all over.
Oh, okay.
You know, so I just tried to mislead her as best I could. So we had a real difficult time organizing and getting into military position, military gate. So I was sent with a couple other guys over to guard the one of the highways coming into Vagel under a railroad track, and did that, and an ambulance came up, a German ambulance, and out of it poured German riflemen. So we just unloaded on that for the most part. Now, between the road from St. Odin Road to Vagel and the space of land between the that area and the River, the Germans were coming down there rather fast to try to capture Weigel and have a fight
Right.
in and around that area. One Bill D. Huff of the 1st Platoon was slow in getting down to Weigel, and he noted there was a group of Germans, a battalion of Germans coming down the road from St. Odin Road. So he hurried up and made contact with our officers, and they sent him back with a small squad of individuals, not to put up a firefight, you can't do that with a battalion.
Sure.
But to contact anyone that might do them a favor. He contacted a Dutchman on a bicycle and had him ride ahead some distance until he got close enough to see that battalion of Germans and try to get a literal account of the number of Germans and then come back and tell D. Huff. Well, he did that. And we let the Germans pass through us, and we got in behind them, behind not quite to St. Odin Road, but near St. Odin Road, opposite Heathwick Castle, and between the All River and the All River and the St. Odin Road.
Right.
And we set up a dustpan. We were the dustpan, and A and B Company got organized just outside of Weigel, and were the Broom, and they swept up as they met the Germans and fought them back and pushed them into us. We captured another 400 of them.
Okay.
What are we going to do with them? I don't remember there what we did with them.
Well, there were a lot of details. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing how many of the details you can still remember. Can you tell us about that experience we mentioned earlier when you spared the life of a German soldier?
Well, after that fracas of getting in behind the Germans, evidently there was a period of time there that resupply to the Germans was supposed to be coming up behind them. And so there was a German that I was observing. He was a big guy, he must have been over 6 feet. And he did not have any sidearms, pistols or Lugers or P-38s, nor did he have a rifle. He had the 2 boxes he was carrying, and I don't know what was in the boxes, but he was trudging along that area where I had just passed through and was maybe 50 yards from him. And I just could have shot him dead right there, but I didn't. I figured, and it passed through my mind, that he may be married and he had children and a wife, and that's it, so I let him go. Now he was going into A and B Company, so I had a non-committal resolve that I didn't have to shoot him. And so I just wonder what I would have told the story to as a psychiatrist would approach me, and what he would call me, and what he would think of what I did. He might have a different answer that if I told the story to Colonel Johnson or my company commander, what they would have thought, but I never told anybody. So off he went, and whether he made it to A and B Company or had a confrontation with them, I don't know.
Whether he, I don't know how old he was, or whether he's still alive in Germany today, maybe.
Yeah, maybe so.
Maybe. And so I know, I don't mean to skip ahead because I know a lot happened during your war experiences, but the other main event, the other main operation you were involved in was the Battle of the Bulge. And that was when, like in late 1944, early 1945, Adolf Hitler launched a counteroffensive against the Allies like Mr. Rice, who were coming in. He thought we can give it one last try from the German side to push them back. And, the likelihood of it actually stopping the Allies from coming in, there was no hope, but Hitler was running out of options. So I'm not an expert on the battle, but he launched a counteroffensive into the Allied position, and he pushed them so that there was a bulge in the Allied lines. Is that right? That's why it was called the Battle of the Bulge? Mm-hmm. And you were involved in that, and you got wounded in that battle, right?
Yeah, I was wounded twice in Normandy. it was no big deal. I just walked in past the window and a bullet hit into my stride and bounced off the floor and hit my left knee. And I just pulled up my pant leg and pulled the bullet out and put it in my pocket and hit it with a piece of shrapnel and forgot about it. And then we did go to the medic. But there was another story in Bastogne, because we were always in the attack, a running attack.
Right.
Never a defense, except this one Bastogne condition. And we for the most part, were in Marmelade-le-Grand after Holland, and we were getting refurbished and not new weapons, but cleaned up and done different and new clothing, etc. Take showers and lived in some of the barracks that the Germans had occupied, and got a short furlough to Nice, France, or Paris. You could take your choice there. The Army discriminated against the lower level, the privates and private first classes, and gave all the non-coms the choice to make. And so I took Nice, France, and went down there and enjoyed a day or two, and, and then the Battle of the Bulge broke out, so it was about the 15th or 16th of December, and we were called to get aboard the GI trucks and get to Marmelade-le-Grand as quickly as possible. I spent the night, and in the early morning we packed our bags, and we never did get a resupply of our weapons and ammunition and clothing. Okay. So we were short on all three of those. I was given the assignment to take out a patrol in Bastogne, and Lieutenant Bennett gave me 18 syrettes of morphine and told me to use them if I needed them, and we needed them. And I had a guy by the name of John Thomas was my #1 scout, and he was about 20 yards ahead of me going down a long sloping hill, semi-permafrost and patches of snow, and a tree here and a tree there and barbed wire and etc. So it's the movement toward the road running parallel to our direction was slowed us down. The barbed wire slowed us down because we had to wait for the guys behind to catch up. Right. We had a good military spread. Right next to me was Art Texiera, scout #2, and then the last man in the group was John W. Curtis, and he was the breakaway man. This was an observation activity. Don't try to develop a firefight because you're going to lose with that few men you have. Right. Just observe. And so I put John W. Curtis as #4 so that he could get away and observe everything. And he did. So we came to this road that ran parallel to our direction. And to my left was a fork in the road, and that was the entrance to this little village, and hardly a village, but it had a few buildings in it, and it was down in a deep valley. I sent John Thomas up the left fork of the road, and he was cracking through the ice and trying to secret himself in among the hedgerows and bramble and bushes that he could. He wasn't getting anywhere, so I told Arthur Texiera to call him back and have him take the right fork of the road. Okay. So he did, and he passed through us, and for the most part disappeared. I didn't hear him since. In the meantime, the sniper in a 5-story building that was housing farm equipment saw me. I'm sure they saw more than me, but they were not after the rest of the guys, they were after me, the leader of the patrol. And they wanted to hit me in the obligata, the distance just above the right shoulder and to the bottom of the neck. Once you get hit there, you're through. You got no communication whatsoever. You're a dead man walking. Right. And so I was in a position on the side of the road on a slate, on a slope, and a hedgerow or a large haystack was situated nearby, and it was rotten and hard as rock. And I could feel blood running down into my leg and my boot. The boot was warm. The weather there was sub-zero. It was cold, cold. And I knew something was wrong, but I never did feel the hit. So I gave Arthur Texier, the 18th arrest, I said, give me a shot of morphine. And so he did, right through my boot. And he took the 17, and I told him to go back, take the right road that John Thomas, for the most part, had, and go back and tell him what's happened. In the meantime, John W. Curtis had made his observation, and he got away. So here I am out here by myself,
Right.
and it's getting lower, twilight, and it's getting toward dusk. And that was what was worrying me. I thought that maybe they had sent a German patrol out to get me, and they would finish me off out there, or set that haystack on fire. Neither one of them occurred. But I had to assume something else was going to happen, that they were going to fire tracers over my head and shoot up the area where John W. Curtis was, because they knew anybody else in that patrol would back up, and they would then have it covered with machine gun fire. But they didn't. My assumption was not correct there. But I had to prove to myself that that was a possibility. So I had to check that knee and see if it was broken.
Right.
So when I got up, my right arm came up in front of me, and I got another shot. And it hit the right radius and took about 4 to 6 inches of bone out. I didn't ever feel that one either, because I'm under morphine.
Right.
You know. And the helmet came off, and I dropped a submachine gun, and I dove toward the haystack, and there I was until the waiting hours came into darkness, and I saw John W. Curtis return through the hedgerow, cracking through ice again, and he got very close to me when I observed him and called him, here I am, here, I need some help. So I'll roll out onto the roadway, and you give me the butt of your rifle, and you take the muzzle, and we'll work our way back. So we did that, and it took us about an hour for the most part to get back to our line. So we had a difficult time identifying ourselves, because now it was getting on to darkness, and coming into darkness without a proper identification is anathema. You're in trouble.
Right, because you could get shot by an
Yeah,
American.
it'd be friendly fire to do you in.
Right.
After Bastogne, which was about 10 days, I guess,
Yeah.
that I was put in a nunnery, and 4 Belgian Catholic girls took care of me. And every time I wanted to go to the bathroom, the chief officer, whose name was Lieutenant Janice Van Hees, she was a first lieutenant. She had detailed a German prisoner to come and pick me up and deliver me and take me back. And from the time that Patton broke in and relieved us, they didn't reduce us to captivity, you know. They said well, we captured you guys here, and you're nearly worn out and gone. That's a lot of baloney. Patton came in and, for the most part, gave us supplies that we needed, etc., etc., and we moved back to France, in Marmelon-les-Petits and Marmelon-les-Grands, and we got refurbished there. Then from there, we went to the regiment, went to activities that were strange. They were relief activities. We were, for the most part, going to a Birch's Garden.
Okay.
And the 506 beat us there. So they had the pick of the wine, they had the pick of the chicks, and they had the pick of everything.
And Berchtesgaden.
Yeah.
I think that's what I got. Berchtesgaden.
Yeah.
There we go. So that was where the eagle's nest was,
Yeah.
which was kind of like Hitler and his superiors, not superiors, Hitler and his cronies, kind of their retreat, right? Like one of their retreats. They called it the Kelstenhaus, the Kelstenhaus, the eagle's nest. So you guys were racing, the Americans, you were racing each other to see who could capture that.
Well, so were the French. They were trying to beat us there too. The 501 won the race, and I can remember riding up in trucks and all of the people that were on the side of the roadway that were driven out of the city were raising their hands. They wanted food, so we got an extra large supply of K-rations. We just started tossing K-rations out to them because they for the most part were so hungry that you can't imagine their pain and pines that they had going through their bodies. And little children for the most part also. So we gave them what food we could. And that's about as far in as Germany we got, except on a release of activities. After we got to Bulge's garden, they didn't know what to do with us. The 101st Airborne Division was in Bulge's garden, and for some reason there were still some athletes left, and they wanted to organize a track team. So, oh boy,
that's right up your alley.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. So we organized a track team, and I ran a 5,000 meters. I got beat by one guy about 20 yards or so. But later on, he went to UCLA and I went to State College, and I met him when I was coaching cross country, and I made sure I beat him then.
Yeah.
But he never knew it. He didn't forgot my name. He didn't remember that.
No, but of course you remembered his name.
So I didn't push it from there on. I just was satisfied that I did get even.
So when you took over Berchtesgaden, do you remember like what time was that? Do you remember the month? That had to have been 1945, right?
Yeah.
April?
No, it was in December.
Of 44?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we just came out of Bastogne and marched
Right.
on the Grand,
Right.
you see.
Yeah.
So we occupied the area, and we could do pretty much what we wanted, and walk around and show our military strength and etc. and frighten the inhabitants. Some of us went hunting for deer. Some of us just played softball and volleyball, etc., and swam until they invented and brought into being a point system. Do you know about that?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, if you were married, you got 10 points. If you got a silver star, you got X number of points. If you were in a combat zone for 6 months, you got points. You got points for every crazy thing that you can imagine. And the minimum number of points was to go home was 72. I had 98. Now, our replacements could never have gotten that number of points to go home.
Right.
They had some 50-some.
Right, because they weren't part of the invasion.
Yeah,
right?
They were not a part. And they replaced somebody in the invasion. So they didn't have much strength by way of points to get going home. So we were given the option to stay with the 501, which was being deactivated now. In other words, we would have been transferred to some other regiment or to another division. Okay. Probably the 82nd or the, I don't know what other one, maybe the 17th. And maybe they'd send us to Asia for the 11th Airborne. But I lost my track now.
Oh, that's okay. Was this near the end of World War II? Is this?
Yeah.
So this was.
So we organized a track team.
Yes.
And we traveled for the most part in all the velodromes that we could possibly get into, and ran a track meet. General Patton came up, but I can't dare tell the story about General Patton. We just have to let that one go, because there's too many Patton societies in the United States. They might come after me. But we were disbanded for the most part. Most of the 501 parachute infantry, evidently, except those individuals who did not have the points, chose to go home.
Okay.
So we were sent to cigarette camps. I went to Camp Lucky Strike, there was a Camp Pall Mall, there was a Camp Camel, there was a camp this or that, and they were spread out around southern area of France, and then processed there. And then we got on board some of these old ships and in a convoy, went on home, arrived in Norfolk about the 22nd of December, almost to the hour that I got wounded in Bastogne. And
1945 now?
Yeah, 45.
Yep, 45.
And I was back in college within 3 weeks. I had 2 years of college before I went in, so I volunteered for everything.
Right.
And I kind of worked the Army for my own direction, you know, and it worked. So I went on into college, and my senior year, I was president of the student body, and my best buddy, he, for the most part, had been wounded and in Market Garden, and was sent to Palm Springs. And he had a large section of his bone in his right leg removed, and he had a build-up shoe for him, and he married his nurse, who was an Australian nurse. They years later, got a divorce, and he remarried, and he's deceased now. But he would have had the Legion of Honor medal if he had lived, though.
Okay, and that's one of the awards you got. Yeah. So you got the Legion of Honor from France. Yeah. You got the Purple Heart, and that's given to men and women who are wounded in military service. Is that right?
I was willing to give my Legion of Honor award to his wife, but I can't do it because it's not to be transferred.
Okay.
So I still have it, it's on the wall. But I made a jump in Perrières, France, southern France, near Marseille, at 13,000 feet, and it was a tandem jump, and we flew around there over the Mediterranean. I swear to God, I thought I was going to land in the Mediterranean, but there were salt flats that kind of saved us. We got inside the salt flats in good shape. But the United States Army bombed that airport so that the Germans couldn't use it, because they were using it years ago, prior to that, in takeoff points for other damage that they could inflict in France. So they put pockmarkers all over the landing field, and the Germans never repaired it because they didn't give them a chance. So we had a nice jump there.
And so you went back to Normandy several times since when you were there for the first time. What was it like jumping there again, but you know, you were much older?
I had already been through Chula Vista High for 15 years, and I was coaching track and cross country and taught English and some U.S. history. And then Hilltop High School came into being, and it was the overflow from Chula Vista High, and I taught government and history there. And I told you about the incident of the time that I never did show anybody any activity that I was involved in the military, and Lieutenant Strobel and General Eisenhower, didn't I? We already went through that one.
So you said you never talked about your war experiences.
Yeah.
And you said in your book, again, The Trial by Combat, you said this, you said, quote, "Those of us veterans who were still alive had spent the post-war years trying to forget the war, trying to establish our careers, and trying to raise our families." What's the hardest thing for you to think back on about your war experiences? Can you think of one thing that stands out more than another?
One of the difficult times is to try to reinvent myself and step aside from all of the military activities. Step aside from it and let it be. Get beyond it. And that's very difficult. And you can't do it by yourself. You have to do it with other people,
Right.
with other buddies.
Right.
So what we did is we reunioned every year of about 300 that did survive. And in reunion, we could close the issue. We needed closure on all of the military activities that we were ever involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that as best we possibly could. Closure. And we kept up the closure when we went back to France, because the French just hovered over us. They wanted to hug us, they wanted to kiss us, they wanted to do everything they possibly could to make us welcome, and they did so. And invited us in their homes and everything. They just went beyond their elastic limits, stretched out so far beyond that it's lasted some 20, 30 years already. So every time I went back, something different happened. This last time,
2019?
yeah,
Yeah.
I was riding in a Jeep with a couple other guys down the main boulevard to the Center City Plaza. This was the 77th anniversary of D-Day. There was, I believe, there was not a soul in their own homes in Coronado. Not a soul. They were all out in the streets from near and far, from all over Coronado Peninsula. There was hundreds of thousands of people, and they were orderly, and they were watching us coming in, and it was a parade of civilians with old baggage, old broken down equipment, old bicycles recreating their pains and their suffering. That preceded us in, and then for the most part we came in. I was the #1 feature in that array of activities that came
Sure.
in. And as we got close to the grandstand, a little girl, well, she wasn't little, but she was big enough to know what she was doing. She stepped off the curb. She was dressed in blue, and she stepped off the curb and gave me a high five. And I gave her a high five back. Somebody took a picture of that, and they printed it, and we were the boy and girl post people for the rest of the year in France. And so that was a kind of a way of crossing the boundary lines that we needed to.
Right.
So Brenda led me up on the grandstand, and
Your wife, Brenda?
yeah. So here was General Mealy. You know him?
Yes, General Milley,
All
yeah.
this publicity.
Right.
And next to him was General, Mealy had four gold stars running right down the center of his fatigues. They didn't put them on epaulets.
Okay.
Epaulets, that's formal. And then General Wilinski was standing right next to him, and I think the two wives were there. I'm not sure. I was oblivious of them. But after we got up there, Brenda told someone, I don't know who it was, to please move over. I'm going to take a picture of General Mill.
Yep.
And so she did, and I had my finger up like that, and like I was lecturing the general, and someone took a picture of that, and that looked kind of funny. I had my finger almost pointed at him.
Right.
Here's the staff sergeant that doesn't even belong up there is lecturing the commanding general in third line for presidency of the United States.
Right.
So I shook his hand, and he paid no attention to me because from what I have heard now, he had an awful lot on his mind. And I thanked him for supervising 157,000 GIs, and et cetera, et cetera. Then the French national anthem just began to play, and I turned toward General Wilinski, and he said to me, "Sergeant, why didn't you say some of those nice things that you said to General Wilinski?" And that dumbfounded me, and I stood there like the hair standing on the back of my head at attention, and frozen in muscle and intellect. And the band played on, And then we moved over where the general was seated, and we sat next to him, and while he supervised the swearing in of 21 GIs in the 101st Airborne Division. They take an oath right in front of him. From there, I don't think it got to be a blur after that. We traveled around France a little bit and then on home.
Yeah. So that gave you closure, and I know
Yeah.
you're on the news a lot for jumping out, for parachuting out of an airplane for like your 97th, and of course your 100th birthday.
Yeah.
Do you plan on jumping out for your 101st birthday?
We're trying to maneuver and look forward to and have sponsors prepare our way for the last jump when I'm 101. I am the last guy, the last jumper in the 101st Airborne Division that jumped in Normandy.
Right.
June 9th. I am the last guy that jumped in Holland on September 17th.
In 2019?
Yeah.
Yep.
The last guy. So I can be a little bit proud and
Sure.
blow my horn about that. And so I think General Taylor might be proud of me. And certainly my company commander would do a flip.
So you're going to end on 101, hopefully, in honor of your 101st
Yeah, right,
Airborne.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And for the most part, there's no sense beyond that. I might opt to jump even in a wheelchair if they pushed me out.
Yeah.
If they could pull that one off.
Sure. Yeah.
But we landed right here at the Hotel del Coronado, and that drop zone was so well prepared and so well manicured that I thought they brought in thousands of tons of desert sand and repaved that sandy area with the specialized sand for us to land in. So Art Schaefer was my jump master, and he operates a jump school in Florida, and he and his girlfriend came all the way from Florida, like you guys came from New York, and he and I jumped together. That's the second jump we made together with his red, white, blue parachute.
Well, you're a special man, Mr. Rice, and can you tell us, if you could tell the young people of America today, if you could tell them one thing, what would it be? Can you think of anything? Especially as considering you were a teacher.
To recognize that you're a human being and that you have some intellect, you have some creativity, and use it for the best possible sources you possibly can for the good. Stand up and make a decision and stick with your decision. So you in your lifetime are going to be suffering some kind of pain. Pain makes man think. Thought makes man wise, and wisdom makes life tolerable. Or if you bend it the wrong way, intolerable. So I would tell them to stand up and speak up and don't shut up, but to be alive. And Coronado was the best place where you could possibly do all three of those, because I know you guys are going to suffer from fame, shame, and blame. So work your way through it like we had to do under different circumstances. There we are. So let the bells ring out for thee. Let the bells ring out.
What were you just quoting? Let the bells ring out. Were you quoting something?
Either that or I made it up.
Huh.
And the bells have been ringing in my head ever since.
Yeah. And can you tell me, why do you think it's important for kids to learn history?
So that they do not repeat it in the same identical way and make the same obvious stupid mistakes. Look at the time period from World War I to World War II, 20 or 40 some years. World War II to World War III, some 20 some years. We're in the Third World War already. It's going. And we have no way to fight it except a jab and no job. If you don't take a jab, you don't get a job.
Interesting times we're living through right now, and you lived through the, or at least the tail end of the influenza pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Back in 1918 to 1920.
Yeah. And so, if my father was alive, he probably would be proud or semi-proud of me. I don't know. But anyway, there was a revision, for the most part, in my mind, for that to happen. So I did the best I could with what I had, and I've been competitive, really competitive ever since. So in the last few years, I have given up most of the authority or power that I had and turned the power into authority, and then got rid of authority because I don't need it anymore.
Right.
I can stand up and shut up, and so I obey.
And what's the secret to living to 100?
Running. I ran and I ran and I ran, and I never walked. Jogging was a forbidden word. To forgive is divine, but that's not airborne policy. So
no.
I had an advantage on all of these guys because I was a runner. 4 years of high school running and 2 years of college running, and then back again to college afterwards. So I worked my internal organs to the maximum. Worked them beyond their elastic limits so that they were functioning so well that I can live off the excessive up to date. And I don't know how else to put it, or how else to deal with it, but that's was my formula.
Well, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, so it's never too late for everybody. So I go to the gym 3 times a week.
You do cross fitness, right?
Yeah, I like CrossFit. I got 2 bum knees. Well, 1 bum knee, it's bone on bone. The other one has been replaced. But I'm too old to go under anesthetic, and afraid I might die on a gurney. Oh. So I just gut it out and
keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
So part of the policy is move forward, like the Apache Indian of the Southwest and the Cherokee Indian of the Northeast, as they move toward each other, bending themselves in a trail of tears, meet in the continental center of the United States. And the Apaches say, we never say goodbye, we say see you soon.
What is your favorite meal?
Well, I think lobster.
Lobster?
Yeah. And Brenda loves lobster, so I bend in that direction. The second favorite is the one that bends in her direction is filet mignon. So we had that last night at another gathering, and they shot videos, and they one fellow was a prisoner of war, and he was able to come. Another was Rosie the Riveter. I met Rosie the Riveter.
Wow.
She was authentic. She was no phony. And so they took too much time explaining them, and I only had a couple of minutes to talk, so I goofed it up. I really made a mess of what I said.
No, not you.
I didn't tell you about the watch, did I?
Was that the watch when you fell out of the plane on D-Day and your watch?
Yeah, stripped the watch off of my arm all the way down to my wrist, and it was never found. And I told the story to some French watchmakers, and they all of a sudden jumped onto this idea. They made 100 watches, identical to the ones that were sold, and they were 7 jewels, except the band was not a leather. And I bought it at Jessup Jewelry's, a big-time jewelry store in San Diego, for $286. Hamilton was the thing then, and I guarded that thing like you can't believe.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, it was a lot more money back then.
Yeah, well, was it? So I gave my money away. The Army took care of me.
And Mr. Royce, what's your favorite book? Do you have a favorite book?
We didn't have too much time, but most of them were textbooks. I liked textbooks. I loved going to school. I loved being in the classroom. I liked standing in front of the students, and that was part of the closure. I could stand up and talk to those kids. And the best kids I ever had in school were the cross-country kids. The best kids, because they had discipline and they had desire and they liked me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you had a connection.
yeah, I had the connection and I took advantage of it. And that served me well for the most part. So Brenda and I, we've been to almost every reunion that the high school classes, Chula Vista and Hilltop High, have ever had. So that's a real pleasure. They honor me that way. Oh, and the library at Hilltop High School has been named in my honor.
Tom Rice Library? Yeah.
You can't believe all of these things that they did. It's unbelievable what they're doing. And how do I say thank you to all of them?
Well, I don't think you have to.
Yeah.
No. If you, I know you can't see it right now, but I know you have the wound spot on your right arm still, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We lost a bone.
Oh, the funny one there, I was having trouble in class with a kid. He was doing too much talking and wasn't listening to what I was saying, because I ran a dictatorship in what I was doing, and a democracy after I finished, you know.
Sure.
And so this kid was continually talking, and I didn't call him a dirty elephant or anything like that, but let's see, I had my sleeve rolled up. Oh, no, I didn't at that moment. I went to the PE teacher, a guy by the name of Ted Testa. He was a gung-ho character, would have volunteered to fight in Afghanistan. And he knew my total story. He said, well, roll your sleeve up.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked up and down the aisles all the time. I was in contact with these kids, total.
Right.
And I made sure that he saw my arm where the wound was. And Ted Testa took him back into his PE class and told him, look at Mr. Rice's right arm. This is where a German shot him and he killed that German. Oh, that was an endpoint learning that kid had better shut up.
Yeah.
And he did from there on.
I'll bet.
You better be careful of Mr. Rice.
Yeah. Hey, and these last few questions, do you have a favorite movie?
Let's see. I liked the Sound of Music.
Oh yeah.
That one was a good one.
Yeah, my siblings and I love that
Yeah.
movie. My parents grew up watching it. You know, it was like the one movie that came on TV for the longest time.
Yeah.
Once a year. How about this one? Do you have a favorite person from history?
Favorite person from what?
Favorite person from history? Yes, someone you really admire from history.
Probably George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why, but just George Washington. And right parallel to him, Lincoln. Those two. Political scientists some 100 years ago evaluated all the presidents in the United States, and those two were in the top 3 or 4.
Sure. Yeah, it's probably still are today.
Yeah.
And then I think we may know the answer to this one. I can take a guess. What is your favorite hobby? Do you still run? Do you still...
No, I can't run with that knee. But my favorite hobby would be to talk to military units, small ROTC classes.
Mm-hmm.
I got one coming up at San Diego State College in October, and the commanding officer is a woman, a lieutenant colonel, so we're in contact with her. I think I'll make a syllabus for them and give it to her, and then I could get a lot of paperwork to hand out to those guys, show the flight pattern and some of the crazy things that we did.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll love that.
So I'm strictly, I can't help it, I'm strictly so oriented Airborne Army that there's no sense in struggling against it.
Mm-hmm.
So they know me as an airborne soldier for the most part, that's all.
All right, thank you everybody very much for watching this interview with Mr. Tom Rice. I hope you have enjoyed it, and just a lot of incredible stories and an incredible man who's dedicated in service to the United States. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and click that subscribe button below the video so that you can stay up to date with all the other videos on the History Bites YouTube channel. And please share it with all your friends. And until next time, go learn your history.
That's right. Yeah, go and live your history, because you're making it.